Good afternoon, everyone. To respect your time, it's 12 o'clock, so I'm actually going to get started. People can continue to dribble in. First of all, I'm going to expose a major personal flaw that I have, and that's that I can't write presentation titles very efficiently. So that's the first half of the title of this project, and we have a second entire slide for the rest of the title. And the problem is, I think sometimes I'm like, oh, but there's all this really important information I need to give you context of what's going on. I mean, I know that's kind of what the blurb's for, but I try to catch you with really catchy titles that take a page and a half. So you'll have to forgive me that we actually need 2 slides just to get the title. The other thing that I didn't do, and I noticed a few other people did, is I actually have nowhere on a slide or anything like that explained who I am. And I think that's also because I'm actually very used to doing audio talks, because I'm an audio designer, I was a composer, location recordist. But when I presented this talk to them, they said, oh, we like your talk, but we want to put it in the design stream. And so I realised, can I just get a bit of a show of hands? Who here are designers and not audio people? Yeah, so we've got quite a good mix here. So I will give you the courtesy of just explaining a little bit of who I am. So my name is Stephan Schutze. I've been in the industry for over 23 years. I am the co-founder or the founder of Sound Librarian, which is my company. That includes doing freelance audio design, technical audio design and location recording, but also we create and distribute sound effects libraries that are traditional sound effects libraries that are used by people like Skywalker Sound, Disney, Weta, etc. Sound packages with content in them that are part of the Epic store, so that they've actually got Unreal functionality in them. I have sounds of mine that get used in Hollywood film trailers like Top Gun and the Batman, etc. So I've been doing sound stuff for a long time, but I expanded that about 10 years ago to start actually doing talks in other areas as well. So it actually kind of fits in here to be doing one on a design topic. So the whole idea behind this one is to kind of present a little bit of the idea that we understand that VO and recorded VO is a desirable thing for our projects, and I'll go into why in a second, but we also understand that it can be a very expensive outlay. So what we're trying to achieve in a lot of cases with any of our projects, memorable, memeable and shareable. And that might sound like a bit of a joke, but it really isn't. We are all hoping that the things that we create are going to get noticed. If somebody makes a meme out of our project, even if it's kind of poking fun at our project, that's a win. And it is kind of funny. I will go into, in the Solium Infernum game, we use the Enochian language, and I'll explain that a little bit. But quite legitimately, one of the directors was like, well, yeah, but if this causes a furor because people are kind of upset that it's witchcraft, that's free marketing. And it's kind of funny. You hear about the sorts of people getting upset about Harry Potter, and it's like, oh, these books should be burnt. It's such a, you guys are just making it sell more copies. You're doing so much harm to your own cause by causing a big fuss about it. So we're really hoping that anything we do is going to be something that people want to talk to their friends and colleagues about, they want to share. If they meme it, then that's a total win. And I mean, that's why I chose that picture out of, like, when I was looking through some of the artwork and stuff that I had available. And it's like, yes, that's our princess talking to the pig. And it's just one of those easy ones that people can look at and go, what's going on? And I don't care, but it's cool. And so we all sort of, we tend to gravitate towards those sorts of things. You also have to forgive me using the microphone. If I try to stand still, I'll just twitch a lot because I'm restless and I'll move around. All right, so let's get right into the crux of this. The frequency range of human speech. This is the only slide that has any sort of technical data, so don't stress too much. So males are from 80 to 180 hertz, and female voices are from 165 to 255. Obviously, they are averages and they can vary, right? So the broad range is roughly from 80 hertz to 255 hertz. So if I ask you to guess what the most sensitive frequencies that we're used to hearing are, they are basically 80 to 255. And this is the thing. More than anything else, our ears, our brain are wired to hear speech. We of course, we process everything else, but speech is really, really important, because speech is the thing when I say, look out, duck. you know, or there's a truck in the way, or get out of the way, or whatever. You need to hear that, because whilst you might hear the truck and you might sort of be able to interpret that information, we communicate, and one of the reasons why the human species is a successful species is because we have complex ways of communicating. I can give you a sentence that has all sorts of nuance and information in it that's going to allow you to go away and act on that information, and we're pretty efficient at it. And so, and I'm sure we've all played games that have had printed out text on the screen, whether it's Animal Crossing or some of the early Zelda games or whatever, and it can be acceptable, it can even be endearing, it can be cute. But the difference for most of us is if we have a really good game that's got a really impactful story and it's being voice acted, I'd be quite surprised to find somebody go, oh, no, I get more impact out of reading the text slowly as it's coming on screen. It's just not really how we work as a species. So we respond to human speech. And here's the other thing. Even if we don't understand the language, I spent 3 years living in Japan and I could speak some Japanese at the time. Weirdly, I could speak more than I could understand. I don't know how that worked. Knowing my brain, that doesn't actually surprise me. But you know, so I was experiencing media over there. And at one point there was a movie that I watched and I thought, oh yeah, this is cool. And it was actually a movie about the historical event of the Yamato, the real Yamato battleship during World War II, and it was a dramatisation. And I watched this whole movie, and no subtitles, it was completely in Japanese, and I didn't understand the individual words, but I understood what was going on. And there was literally one scene where there's one young sailor who's gone to meet the mother of a friend of his, and you can see that they're both being stoic and all sorts of stuff, and they're talking to each other, and she's almost crying and he's almost crying, and I'm sitting there screaming at the screen. It's like, oh, for God's sake, give each other a hug. But of course, being Japanese at that time, that wasn't going to happen. But so I understood exactly what was going on, and I didn't understand the words. And this is key to the presentation today. We can convey massive amounts of information and critically important emotional information without anybody needing to understand the specific words. Because really what we're trying to convey is the emotional intent. And I mean, if you have a look here at this little GIF that's going on, that's one of the archfiends from Solium Infernum. And there's a lot going on in the animation there. And the animations are excellent, especially for this character. This character is Murmur, and they are kind of, I guess, Prince X of the dead sort of thing, sort of somewhat skeletal, etc. And you can see the jerky movements, etc. And so when you try to add sound effects to that and VO to that, you want to add something that is appropriate to those movements and highlight that, and highlight the sort of the emotional situation you've got going on. We'll look at that in a second. All right, so Baldur's Gate, I saw, was rumoured to have about 190,000 lines of dialogue. We got any producers in here that reckon they could throw their hand up and give us a budget for that? I don't know that I've got enough dollar signs on that. That just makes me twitch. I've worked on various projects with budgets for dialogue, etc., and they are scary just simply because it takes a lot of time. And with voice actors, you're paying for their time. And then, of course, there's obviously the cutting it up and implementing and all that sort of stuff. So dialogue is expensive. Recorded dialogue is expensive. Localisation adds many, many zeros to that equation, and it really does. Even text localisation. I've seen projects that have been fairly small, and they said, yeah, we've just sent that off to get, you know, the text localised into Spanish and French and German and Korean and Japanese, etc. And those budgets go up quickly. When it's recorded dialogue, it goes through the roof. And so as not even indies, but even developers that don't have massive budgets for projects can look at the whole idea of recorded dialogue and just go, nah, not going to happen because it's going to cost us a lot. I'm going to suggest that it doesn't necessarily need to cost a lot. So this is really, this is sort of the meat and the potatoes of this. It becomes a cost-benefit analysis. We know it's good. We know it's expensive. But there are various different projects to various different levels that have used alternatives. Now, Knights of the Old Republic had dialogue in English, but then they basically had other characters where they were throwing sentences at you in alien languages. The problem is, I think they only had about a dozen sentences, and so literally you would sometimes be talking to an alien, and they'd say a sentence, and then they'd just say the same sentence again. It's just like, oh, there goes that illusion. And the funny thing was that they'd actually gone to a fair bit of trouble of making some quite interesting sounding languages. But when the person's just sort of saying the same word again and again and again and again, it sort of shatters that. So that one was somewhat problematic. Animal Crossing, it's just sort of thing, and The Sims does a little bit of like that as well. Age of Empires was an interesting one because Age of Empires had very, very small snippets, but like literally you'd click on one of the little peasants like, almost. And they just sort of wander around. It was like a word here and a word there. But those became memeable, right? Because I haven't played Age of Empires for 20 years and I can remember those words because they were kind of cute. It's like, oh, there goes my little guy and he's going to pick the fruit off the trees and then he's going to go and hit a rock and go, hello, and stuff like that. And so while it's nice to have your Warcraft and Starcraft things of going, SEV ready, yes sir, and all that sort of stuff, and even though it was a smaller palette, Age of Empires didn't have to worry about localization. And that is, and keep in mind, it's not just the cost of recording that dialogue, it's then editing that dialogue and the programmer time to implement that dialogue. And I know the programmers like me a lot when I save them time. All right, so, but the other question is this, real languages, why do you want them? Do you really need a real language? Honestly, do you? Because what you're trying to do with your story, I mean, these days as well, I mean, especially, Netflix is kind of responsible for this. These days, we have subtitles on Netflix almost all the time because the audio mixes in Netflix are god awful. And like, it goes from, if I can actually hear the things that people are saying, then when the explosion happens, it just breaks my ears. And so you try to get this sort of, your volume on your television or whatever at a reasonable level. And that means that if anybody's having a calm conversation, like, hang on, what did they say? So half the time I've got subtitles on, even for English language. And there are people that will choose to do this in games as well. I will quite often choose to play a game if it's got another language. At the moment playing Generation Zero, much prefer it in the original Swedish with subtitles. Ghost of Tsushima, much prefer it in the original Japanese with subtitles because it just feels more like I'm there. And so that's a weird thing. It's like, well, that game I could play in English and I've chosen to play it in Swedish or Japanese. And so from this point of view, and the whole idea that people are especially getting used to subtitles, do you actually need it to be in English, or could you just create a language that you use across your entire thing? You have real dialogue, and remember, the importance of the real dialogue for me is the emotional weight of it. If you're getting that emotional weight through, you've leaps and bounds ahead of just written text. Even if they're reading the subtitles, it does make a lot of difference. So, Jumblight Odyssey is technically a hybrid, but even though we do have some English language in it, I actually consider those snippets to be more of a sound effect, because the ones that we have is literally, we've got a small number, although we've increased it a little bit, but we've literally got a small snippet of English language in the game at the moment. But that language snippets are basically PA announcements, and it's things like red alert or jump to hyperspace now. And the thing is that, again, you can almost kind of get away with those things if you've only got a really small handful of them, because they become a stylistic choice rather than something that, you're going to have to expect. Because the interesting thing, again, from spending time living in Japan, you look at a Japanese film written in Japanese that's basically about spaceships or battleships or whatever, and you've got sort of like the Star Trek sort of thing of like the bad guys turn up, and the Japanese way of saying it will be red alerto, because they quite often will just take English phrases because they become iconic as a phrase in English, and they transform it across. We do the same thing. What do we call a giant wave? We call it a tsunami. So we've just adopted the Japanese term there. So there are a lot of languages that share words. And so in that case, if you're going to use them sparsely and think of them as sound effects, you can get away with leaving those in just the one language. So, the two examples I'm going to go through today are Solium Infernum and Jump Light Odyssey. They are quite different in the way we've approached them. Skyrim Infernum is simple and direct, and I'll start off with that one. And then we'll go into the more complex nature of JLo. And as I said, JLo does have some English dialogue in it, but I'm not going to really go into that today. So Solium Infernum, we used a language that's called Enochian. It's an occult constructed language, and it's essentially gibberish made by two Englishmen, and it actually is. It was just these two Englishmen who thought, yeah, we'll make up this language and it'll make us seem really, really cool, and we'll tell everybody it's the language of angels, and, it's a very kind of, a couple of centuries ago sort of thing to do. It's kind of like creating your own religion or whatever else. From what I have seen and find out, there is nothing really legit about this. It was literally just two guys who decided they wanted to make up a language. And now you get some people go, oh, it's the language of angels. No, it was made by a couple of dudes. But it's kind of interesting, and because of that connection with angels and demons and all this sort of stuff, it was very, very suitable for Solium Infernum. And so when we looked into it, we looked up Enochian and we translated some phrases, and even that was kind of funny because the actual Enochian vocabulary is tiny. So the designer said, well, these are the sentences that I want for each of our archfiends have got a handful of emotional responses when they're angry, when they're pondering, when they're giving a command, etc. And he wrote out some things of like, I demand this, for instance, and then we would look at that in Enochian, and very conveniently my wife is both a writer and a linguistics major, and so she basically looked at Enochian and went, I can kind of make it say, go do thing. And so this is the point, is that when you translate them, we're almost getting back into gibberish. But because Enochian is a language that was actually made, there is that potential memeability of it that somebody is going to sit down and try and translate what they're saying. Good for them. That's fine. And they can do that. And that's a fun thing of putting Easter eggs in games anyway. They're not going to find anything scandalous or wrong. It literally is kind of commands that looks like, oh yeah, I can imagine this archfiend saying that. But it basically makes the archfiend sound like, a toddler. Do thing! And so it sort of takes a little bit of that. And that's kind of the other thing. It's like, in some ways, I think the presentation in Enochian works better. Because if we had these giant archfiends going, I command you, it's like, yeah, okay. And in English, sometimes it just loses a bit of that impact. So it was mystical, it was strange, and yeah, look, if somebody turns around and says, they're using the language of demons, this game should be banned, I think our marketing department would just laugh themselves silly because they would love that, because it was just an opportunity for free marketing. So I can't imagine Kelsey being too upset about that sort of a comment at all. All right, so this is a little video which I'll press the go button on in a second. So first off, we have Astaroth, big wind demon type dude. Then we have a couple of other archfiends, and they'll just go through a single phrase, and then we'll work through it. Is this going to work?
Of Zoraya.
Yeah, so out of those, Belial's probably the most human in sound. Murmur, who is the one in the middle, is actually made up of three different voices all fighting with each other. So there's three sort of personalities in there. We've got a couple of other archfiends that I've got different processes. The very first one, the big demon one, I felt so lucky when we got that. We got a bunch of voice actors who sort of sent in their show reels, and then there's one I just went, it's like, some guy called Adrian, and I sort of played the MP3, and it's like, my name is Adrian, and I'm just like, oh my God, and I can't think what I just said an octave lower, and that was his natural voice, and I'm like, oh my God, we've just got Astaroth, and I had to do so little processing to get Astaroth. I actually haven't met this guy. I'm expecting him to be about 8.5 feet tall, but it was perfect. His voice was just so perfect for that. Whereas with the other ones, we did sort of processing. But there you've got three different presentations. We don't have to do any localisation there, and it adds to the mystique. And we've got different performances. So when they're angry, obviously they're doing shouty stuff, and when they're pondering, they're a bit more. The pondering was a little bit done. But the thing was is that the amount of recording time it did to do those things was not very much. It was like an hour for each actor to just get us all the lines, right? And I saw some eyebrows go up, and your eyebrows are going to go up even more when you get to hear what happens with Jump Late Odyssey. So this was simple and direct. We just recorded some people, added it to the animations, done. There's no magic there. The main magic is that we just didn't use English. And I think the effectiveness of it here is significantly more than if we had used English. We don't have to do any localisation, we're done and dusted. And so from that point of view, as I was saying, unless there's a real reason that you need it to be in English to convey something that just cannot be conveyed with some subtitles, and in this case we're not even subtitling, because the whole idea is it doesn't need to be super clear. It's just he's saying, go off and do a thing. Go on, get out of my sight and do the thing I need you to do. All right, so yes. So we worked out some of the lines, translated them, synced them up to the animations, we also, and this is definitely key, this is very, very important. We recorded a bunch of vocalizations, and what I mean by vocalizations is the grunts, the groans, the yells and all that sort of stuff, because in some of them we literally have, there's actually a beautiful one of one of our archfiends, and she does an angry thing. But what she actually does is she sort of stands there first, and then she delivers a line. And so we got the vocalizations of somebody sort of grunting and growling and everything like that, and it meant with those animations we had more to work with. And I would say again, vocalizations are golden. Anytime you've got anytime you're working with a voice actor, to do anything, get them to do vocalizations as well. They can be the traditional sort of and all those sorts of ones as well. But the more you get, because those things can be used and they can be combined, they can be used for all sorts of stuff. So they are incredibly valuable. All right. So, yep, standard recording process, except we used a created language. Artificial language also helped with the otherness. And that's another point there. If you're wanting to have a weird creature, if it speaks English, it's like, well, how weird is it? I mean, you know? So this was simple in scope and execution, this part of it. The rest of Solium Infernum is not simple in scope and execution. There's the most complex UI I think I've ever seen. Great, but wow, many, many layers deep. All right, now we're going to look at Jump Late Odyssey. This is fan art that somebody did. This is stunning. That's why I used it. It's just such a beautiful picture. All right, so, okay, in this particular case, very different goal. To bring the ship to life, create a sense of havoc, hustle, bustle, activity, convey the emotional state of the crew. That was the critical part here. Support the emergent events we hoped would occur, make the player care more about the crew. That's another important part. So, I'm going to break it down, because what we did was we had words, and out of those words we basically created a structure for how it was going to work, and then we did the recorded dialogue, and then I built the system. I'll get around to that in a second. Do not overthink your created language, and I'm really serious on that. There are things like apparently Klingon is a language somebody actually sat down and tried to do all the structure of it and so that it would make some sense, etc. I really don't think you need to do that. So my vocabulary was 100 words and then the functional words. I'll get to those in a second. But I literally just sat down and went, all right, cool, this is moon, moose. Yeah, that sounds good. Ribbon, dribbon. Yeah, okay, cool. Drum, hand, grand, fan. Yeah, that'll do. I'm not kidding. That's how fast I worked through it. The list of 100 words took me less than an hour. The entire vocabulary for this part of the game took me less than an hour. There's no reason to overthink it, not that part of it at least, because unless you're wanting the player to learn the language and be able to communicate with the language, and you need to have some sort of structure, that's not what we're trying to achieve here, right? So this sort of stuff, and then tempi, stana, uva, vrim. I went through the alphabet, and I want 3 words of A, 3 words of B, 3 words of D, and I just basically just babbled and with a text file open and just wrote them in. These are important though, the connecting words. So these are the ats, the ands, the as, the theirs, the that's, the whys. These are things we use to connect our sentences together. So the word the in an average sort of conversation, if I'm having a conversation with somebody, the word "the" is going to come up quite a lot. So these little connecting words should probably be more prevalent. So you're probably going to record those and you're going to insert them into the system more frequently. But it's how you insert them in the system that works. So in this particular case, I had en, ta, tuda, ra, ya as my connecting words. Now we need to understand how I formed them. Actually, I'm going to jump onto the next slide to explain this and then come back. This is why. This is really important. You have to understand how we speak. Everybody in this room, and even those of you who speak a language other than English, I would put money on the fact that you probably do the same thing in the other languages as we do in English. We do not say the cat sat on the mat. We do not say that. We say the cat sat on the mat. Our joining words, more often than not, get just smooshed into the actual words, right? And so we merge our words, and so it flows. When you're a native speaker, it flows. And that's the big difference. Like when I was trying to speak Japanese, I'd be sitting there going, okay, noun, verb, subject, blah, and so my speech was terrible, right? And so going back, so the word that I might want to be recording is alip. But my connecting words are ta, tuda, en, ra. And so what I would say to the voice actor is like, okay, I want you to read it like this. I want alip as a word separately, because that'll turn up occasionally. But I also want alip ta, tuda alip en, ra alip. And you can hear immediately that they just sound that they're more natural, they're more flown together. They flow better. And this is also important. Everything here was based on the English language. I've had conversations with colleagues in Nordic countries, and they're like, oh yeah, every time you folk make your pretend languages, they're very English. Because in Nordic countries, Sweden, Norway, etc., they have a very kind of singy-songy way of speaking. Not exactly the way I'm doing it, but even in the game I'm playing at the moment, Generation Zero, flipping that across to the English version, it's Swedish voice actors reading the English lines. And they do have this kind of singy way of speaking, because that's the cadence of how Northern European languages speak. Japanese is going to be different, Korean is going to be different, Chinese is going to be different. If you're going to take on any of the African languages, it's going to be different. So my sentence flow is based on English. If you're wanting to emulate an Asian language, work out the sentence flow and cadence there. If you're wanting to work out an Indian language, again, work out something that's appropriate there. So that's just one thing to keep in mind. So now, eyebrows going up again. Actually, that's probably not quite right. It might have been just a bit over $1,000. But here's the point. Those 100 words with the connection words, etc., was only like a page of text. And there's not so much a, oh yeah, can you do that whole line again, but you're a little bit more angry, a little bit more sad. It was literally, here's the text page, and I want you to read all the way through this text page of all these words in just a normal, casual, conversational thing. Cool, great, thank you very much. Now I want you to read through the whole thing again as though you're on duty. Right, let's go, let's go. You're red alert, everybody get to work. That sort of dutiful voice. Then I wanted it in a manic voice, a panicking, and then in a sad voice, etc., etc. And so we literally had a 2-hour session with 4 actors. They did 2 accents each, except for one, who actually happens to be here, and I'm going to call him out for it. Hire this man. Thomas was one of the people who was the voice actor for us, and we said, all right, well, we'll need this in a couple of different accents. And so Thomas went through it in his normal Australian accent, and then I said, all right, what else you got? And he just immediately just broke into a really, really charming Irish accent, and he just hammered through the whole thing. And I'm like, we've got a little bit of time left. And he said, do you want another accent? I'm like, can you do another accent? And all of a sudden he breaks into Russian, and this gentleman's not very tall, but his Russian accent made him sound like a 6-foot-high mafia bouncer. And so literally in a 2-hour session, we got our entire vocabulary done with all our different emotional states for 2 to 3 different accent types. And when I'm saying this less than 1,000, that wasn't per actor, that was pretty much all of them, because it's a 2-hour call, etc. So I've now got a whole bunch of dialogue that I can use for this project. Look, it probably was a little bit more than 1,000, but it was less than $1,500 sort of stuff for everything. So all of a sudden, the whole cost of having language in your game looks very, very different from the thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars that you might otherwise have to spend. Bonus. We got some very, very good performances. And that was one of the other things. Is that the next slide? There we go. Direction. If you are not experienced with direction, get somebody who is, or talk to somebody who is. And this is something I learned years ago. The difference between somebody who knows how to direct and is comfortable directing will make massive difference. Massive, massive, massive difference. Two very quick stories. The first time I had to do directing years ago was for a sports game. Yes, I worked on a sports game. And I got this guy, and his voice was great, he was experienced, etc. And I said, all right, cool. This is for the players on the field when they're running around throwing each other the rugby ball and all that sort of stuff. So can you give me just some generic, just generic chatter, pass it to me, this way, all that sort of stuff. And he's like, yeah, sure, cool. And so I said, okay, cool, we're rolling. So, all right, this way, yes, over here, to me, yep. And I'm like, oh, okay, sorry, let's stop. My bad, I apologise. I did not direct him. I gave him information of what he needed to do. I then rectified that and said, oh, sorry, my mistake. Can you do that again? But the direction is, it's the grand final. You are on the oval, and there's 50,000 people watching, and if you win this game, you'll get a cash bonus. It'll be enough to go out and buy a house for cash. He's like, oh, right, okay, cool. I'll try again, cool. Okay, this way, come on, me, over here. Immediately, from that one or two little sentences of direction, it changed. And we had actually the same thing happen on this. There was, we wanted some pickup lines from the woman who was playing the princess, because she actually did have recorded dialogue for the trailer, and we wanted a couple of bits in there for an extended trailer. And I wasn't available at the time, and somebody else sort of went through that, and there was an issue with one of the lines, and we were doing some more recording, and I just said to her, all right, I just wanted to do a pickup line of the red alert thing. She said, oh yeah, I did that. I wasn't really happy at the time. So no, can we do it again? And this is the whole point. I'm a massive nerd. I've watched Star Trek a billion times. I know exactly how Riker says red alert. And so I just said to her, it's like, I want you to say red alert as though literally you are on the bridge and you are in charge of all these people and they're responsible for keeping these people alive. And can you deliver this like Will Riker or Captain Kirk or whatever? And she's immediately, oh, okay, right. Red alert! Bam, that's what you needed. If you do not have access to a director, find one. Otherwise, you will waste your time on your recording sessions. A good director, or even a semi-competent director, will make a huge difference. So please, don't miss that step. Okay, now we're going to have a bit of a look. So here is... Okay, so you can see here, word level, Aki, that's one of the words, and Anthema, Bandy, Bombo, Carl, Coolet, Dribbin, Drum, blah, 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 blah. So under Hender, we then have Hender, and we have 5 different versions of Hender. So if I play this...
Hender, O, Hender, and Hender, Hender, Yehen.
So you can see there...
Hender, Yehen, Hender, 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 and Hender, O. Yeah, Idani, Tudan, Idane. Quas, Quastek.
We've got the connecting words in with a lot of these ones.
Uvete or Uva.
Right, so this is Wise. This is one of the audio middleware programs. This is the system that I built in Wise. You could do this in Fmod, you could do this in native Unreal, be a little bit more complicated. Don't try doing this in native Unity. Just don't. And that's got nothing to do with the fun with Unity recently. Just don't. All right. So what we've got there is these little checkerbox things are what are called a random object. So the one down the bottom here that says Uva, we've got 5 objects in there, and I click through them individually. But then when you trigger the box at the top that says Uva, it goes, oh, okay. You want me to randomly grab one of these? So when I want the word Uva, or I want a word, it goes down and it just randomly selects one. Right, so this is literally a word level. This is where I've just put in all the words. This is after I spent 4 weeks editing and cutting them all up. There is one of your costs. You will need a sound designer once you've done all those recording things. These little individual words, Jump Light Odyssey has 8,000 of them. So that took me a while to cut up. So there is a cost there, obviously, in that. But, your sound folks should be really happy to do that work. All right, so yeah, the words purposely sound like they are going to run on in a lot of cases. So it's not, oh, okay. It's more like, oh, okay. because I might have more to say, and because we're going to be stringing these together, you want that sort of flow-on effect. So then we get into, this is the sentence level.
Tudan idane. Urap. Over and zone and zone.
Actually, no, that's just actually selecting from all the random ones. So it's still a single word.
Tonari and va tonari.
I'll skip on that a little bit later. So then we string things together. So this is sentence level. Oh, press the button.
Tatem jukta rabendi. Tanran go. Kal tabom nan drum te drum. Who yit fan es connect. Sinta san pop juken eju.
These are a bit soft, sorry.
Only o jinden.
But you can see we're starting to string sentences together. So what we have there is, that is literally just the selection of one voice in the casual emotional state. All right, and then we go into the emotions, and you'll notice over here we have VO state and we have dutiful. Press the button again.
Te wortha kinda yek.
More energy.
Ed rin yerin. Si prop learn look at. Aki cal tat. And the pop lurler.
Bit more energy again.
Igera. Gadrom ye. Bra fa tegan. Donama kato ye. No ten ye. Tag ni go. Motel me to taum. Faraka do no radun. For that smooth no yet.
And finally sad.
Kan yun fan die. Savitev to the Rami. Or Putralo.
So, now, this is really, really important. In this particular case, this is a sim game. There's a lot of people going on. The people are not centrally important. It's a little bit like The Sims, although more. There's like 100-odd crew? 100-odd crew are going around doing their thing. So keep in mind that in some cases there you will have heard the sentence go, blah, 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 blah. There's like a little bit of an inconsistency. I didn't actually mind that because it's not like you're talking character to character like you would in Mass Effect or in a Skyrim or whatever. You're not directly talking to somebody, and so having those sentences be a little bit jumbly, etc., for this project wasn't a problem. If I was making a game like the next Knights of the Old Republic or whatever, where you were literally talking to a character, anytime I felt, it's jumping a little bit, it doesn't really sound like a nice flowing sentence, I'd pull those out and I'd probably put them into another category, because then what I could do is have different intensities of normal casual, a little bit lo-fi casual, a little bit high energy casual, etc. But for this project, I did not need that. Right? This is all about the overall feel of what's going on in the ship. All right. So that's just to make clear the difference between Solium and Infernum, which is literally an archfiend on the sets front and centre going do the thing, versus a sim game where there's lots of little minions going blah 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 around the level. So here is context here that's important. You'll notice the fact that everything's red, we've got red alert here. You'll notice also hope. Hope is one of the key mechanics for Jump Light Odyssey. As the hope goes down, people basically lose control a little bit more, so you're going to get a little bit more angry talking, you're going to get a little bit more sad talking. Currently under red alert, what we've got is they're under stress, so the people on the bridge here are talking to each other, and it's fairly subtle, but they're all sounding a little bit manic. Like, oh shit, oh shit, oh shit, oh shit. But it is fairly subtle, and I'll get to that in a second. Now, a bit of disclosure. Keep in mind this is a game that's still in development. Both games are. I've actually never done a talk about games in mid-development. So, I'm actually not happy with that amount of VO. I think there needs to be more, and the next scene is the same as well. There's two aspects about this. One, I want there to be more of a scene of like, maybe not shopping centre level of talking or what we've got out here level of talking, but definitely there needs to be a bit more communication going on. And the other thing is at the moment, the communication we have is being triggered off timelines, so when they do things. At the moment, we don't have when they're just wandering backwards and forwards and wandering around talking to each other. So that will be another layer that goes in. I'm happy with what I'm getting. I'm happy with how it functions. I just need more of it. So that's the sort of a little bit more of a manic setup. So just to explain how it works. So we have, you saw the project there. I then have what's essentially, it's not a timeline, but it's basically a horizontal space where I've got, here's all of voice actor 1, voice actor 2, voice actor 3, voice actor 4, and then in their other accents, and all sort of in a line, and there's a parameter across there. And the parameter is essentially it's a value from 1 to 100. And we essentially assign an ID to every single crew when they are first created. So, you know, your crew person may be assigned with ID 74. And what it'll do is basically go, okay, that means that you're using this actor, and within the space of each actor, there's also a little bit of pitch shifting. So what you might get is for instance, Thomas's voice in his Russian accent, but this particular crew might be assigned the Russian accent at the highest pitch, so it'll be a little bit of a squeaky Russian mafia person, or it might be a little bit on the lower end. So what we're doing there is we've gotten our 4 actors times 2 voices, except for Thomas, so eight chunks of voice, but with the pitch shifting, it actually gives us multiples of that. And so basically you're not getting entirely unique, but what we're getting across sort of the 100 crew, you can have quite a fairly mixed variety of voice types. And that actually works pretty well. I still need to add in filters for basically radio chatter, so when somebody's sort of off in a little spaceship, you can hear it and it sounds like it's on radio, or if they're wearing a space helmet. And Zootopans are our alien race. I don't know what I'm doing with them yet. I'll get around to that. So here's another example. So here, now this is one of the funny ones because I kind of wanted to put speaking triggers on when they're eating, but if you watch when they're eating, they're all just... and they don't even look up for any time. So there is another animation where they basically eat and stop a little bit. I'm like, yeah, that's where I'm going to put the voice on, but at the moment they're all just shoveling their faces. But the main hit sound you're hearing here is actually people speak when they go to the vending machine. So most of what you're hearing here is a conversation of going to the vending machines, but this is just the more casual speaking. You can hear a little bit of it, but it is, I actually, this is what I'm saying, it's too subtle. One of the problems is, again, because I can't trigger the animations easily, there are interactions. So we have people playing cards against each other, playing chess with each other, jumping in and out of the jacuzzi, and all of those little interactions have actually got more things in it. So it actually worked quite nicely when, you know, 2 people are sitting playing chess, and every time they move a piece, they kind of, aha, I've done a thing. Oh, I've done a thing. So that you get that interaction backwards and forwards. There's also greetings where people hug each other, etc. I've also set it up so that our sentences can actually, there is a sentence end, like an event that we call stop them speaking, and we can actually have stop them speaking with a question mark, so they've got the inflection going up, stop them speaking with like a statement, so you could literally have a question and answer thing if we have the time to implement that. So the system that I've set up and designed actually is designed to sort of have this much capability. Whether we actually get the time to put all that in or not is another question, but I always like to design and implement more than we might have space for, and then if we get it in, it's great, rather than sort of less, because then it's like you're always feeling like you're wanting more. So there is still work to do. I actually think it was really important to actually show it in its state, and if you want to see more of it, there's a really easy way to do that. It's available on Steam. So here's the point. What are your priorities? Telling a story, creating a feel, making something cute or ominous, conveying important information to the player. If it is conveying important information to the player, you know, look out, incoming missile. You might want to say that in a real language, because you probably don't want to be reading text in your first-person shooter and people are shooting at you. Depends on the just making models feel a little bit more lifelike, because it really does. I mean, obviously this is what I do for a living, but adding audio to animations just makes a huge difference to how lifelike things are. Cool, and I think, excellent, we've got a few minutes left for some questions if anybody has any questions, but otherwise, thank you very much, everyone. Now, I can hand this microphone around, or I can just repeat the question if somebody's got a question, because this is being recorded. Yes?
Did you have any hurdles around using the Enochian language as royalty-free licensing? Is it in public domain? Was there anything you needed to do for the two Englishmen that you spoke about?
Yeah, all right, so I'll just repeat that. Did we have any problems with the Enochian language, any hurdles as far as royalties, et cetera, No. I don't, I mean, I think it was done in like the 1700s or whatever, so I don't think there would have been any copyright. They're long dead. It's treated like a bit of a joke by most people. It's not owned by Disney, so we're fine there. Sorry, it's not owned by Disney yet, so we're fine there. So no, and that's the other thing about using Enochian. It was fairly safe. I'm kind of curious where we'd be, like if we decided we want to do something, we wanted to use Klingon, for instance. Is that actually owned? And you know, I don't know. So that would be an interesting one. But yeah, so Enochian was a safe one. Anybody else? Yes?
I'm just wondering, if you were to, you mentioned that different languages have different cadences. If you were to localise into another region, would you redo this for that region, or would you leave it sounding English?
And that's a fantastic question. So it's basically, if you're localising into another language, do you basically match the cadence, et cetera, et cetera? Knowing what I know now, I would if I could. People don't, and the other problem about that, in fact, just a really quick one on localization, I think a lot of people completely miss that. Think about this, right? You've got a character in your game, and you've basically gone, yeah, this is a character, and this actor's going to be perfect for it. And we get Idris Elba, right? Idris Elba has a really, really unique voice and delivery style, et cetera, et cetera. And then you basically pass on information to where the game's going to be localized in other languages, et cetera, et cetera. And they just get somebody who can read the lines. But that person needs to be the Japanese equivalent of Idris Elba as far as presence, the Japanese equivalent of Samuel L. Jackson or whatever, whether it's in Norwegian or Spanish or whatever, just getting some dude or some lady or some person to basically just read the lines. There's a reason why we got Idris Elba, because we want everything that comes with that, all the baggage, all the positive baggage that comes with that. So just to get somebody else, and I agree, the same thing kind of goes for cadence. If I was going to do this in Norwegian, hopefully the team that are able to translate into Norwegian are going to put, you know, they need to be able to understand the emphasis that we're putting on it in English, and not just match that emphasis, but culturally match that emphasis, because they may have emphasis in different places depending on the cadence of their language, the grammar of their language, et cetera, et cetera. So that's an excellent question. That's a talk in itself. Seriously, that's an entire talk in itself. Yes?
Have you ever considered doing something like Altered Carbon, where they had multilingual characters, but everyone spoke in their own language at each other?
So have we ever considered doing anything like Altered Carbon where there was multilingual characters? Oh, I see what you mean. So the Chinese people would speak to each other in Chinese.
No, to across languages, because everyone understands the different languages.
Oh, right. I've never done that. I love that. Because when you first said it, I've watched Altered Carbon. Oh, right. And I had to think about it. No, I love that. The whole idea that we all understand the language. I mean, I would, at a really rough guess, I'd say there's at least a half dozen languages spoken in this room, right? And in Australia, sort of any room, there should be at least half a dozen languages. I would love it if I could understand the native language of every person here, and they could just comfortably relax and speak their native language. I'm like, yep, totally get you. And I speak my native language because there's so much nuance lost. And this is something I've discovered years ago. It was a bit of I guess a prejudice on my part. There was a gentleman who I was working with who was an artist, and he was of Russian background. And I always kind of went, yeah, he feels like he's, you know, a little bit not smart. And that was me very much reading incorrectly. Because, well, of course he doesn't sound sophisticated because he's speaking a language that's not his native language. Yet he's speaking my language almost as good as I do, and I can't speak his language at all. So he's obviously already smarter than I am. But we do this thing, and I think it's actually one of the things where racist comes from. So, oh, you don't speak my language very good, you must be dumb. It's like, they speak your language at all. You know what I mean? But it's a really interesting thing there where I think that in a game would be brilliant. Technically and budget-wise would be fairly onerous, maybe. A lot of localisation. Anyway, any more questions? Yes?
Yeah, you were talking sort of about how there is a mysticism to having other languages that like people don't understand and similar flavour and semiotics of it. I find a lot of RTSs, they'll have English, but they'll use a lot of proper nouns, just have those narrative tools, but also that mysticism on. You don't quite know what those proper nouns mean, and I wanted to know sort of your take on that, whether there is a weakness to like doing it that way opposed to the way you're doing it.
That's an interesting one. So just again, for the sake of the microphone. So a lot of games use mysticism for the otherness, but sometimes they use that with proper nouns. I find the whole proper noun thing to be a little bit fraught in that, I don't know, I'm sure you've all done this at some time or another. I mean, I know I've done it where I start a new book and like it's a fantasy book and the first 4 or 5 chapters just go, and then Hugga Fugga talk to Widdly Waddly and Bloodle Doodle, and I'm like, who on earth are these people and what's going on? And like, you know, and they just go, here's a whole bunch of information. And all of a sudden the mysticism has just been obfuscated by confusion, whereas a good one should basically eke it out a little bit at a time and give you a little bit of this and a little bit of that. And because it's, you know what I mean? It's like, don't overwhelm your audience with too much at once. And this is the whole thing. It's kind of like, I mean, we all know sort of Lord of the Rings, or most of us would know Lord of the Rings, and it's like, you know, the names are all different to the names. They're not Tim and Bob and Jane. Well, there is Sam, and that's a nice easy one. Oh, we grab hold of Sam. I know Sam. I can relate to that one. Then we got Bilbo. Oh, okay. And I mean, like the whole one with the dwarves in The Hobbit. I don't remember their names. There's 12 beady guys with Gimli, Blimly, Wombly, Bombly, and that's the point. And it gets to the point where I'm like, it goes. And so you do need to be careful about that. I think use it sparingly and use it tactically. I mean, that kind of applies to any of our things. Time? Look, if anybody has any other, immediate questions that they'll burst into flames if they don't ask, you just come up and ask me, because it's lunchtime now, I think, so I can hang around for a minute or two. But otherwise, thank you very much, everyone. I hope you found that useful.